And we are live in the wonderful Sports Link studio in Muncie, Indiana. This is the HB Toss, made possible by the creative storytellers of Ball State Sports Link. I'm your host, AJ Swiatek, alongside Donnie Harmon. And Donnie, we're in for a good one.
Oh yeah, we've got a great slate of games this week. It's been a really fun season already to this point. AJ, it's a pleasure to be here.
Certainly, I'm glad you're here, Donnie. And before we get into this next week, let's talk about that last one a little bit. It was interesting. You mentioned it. We'll go to the first segment, the week prior, week 10, in 60 seconds. The week started in Munich, where Tom Brady and the Bucs knocked off the red-hot Seahawks, who were previously on a 4-game winning streak. Then the Lions, they beat the Bears after a missed PAT heard around the world by a score of 31-30. The Dolphins, they then wiped the floor with the Browns in a game that wasn't close from the get-go. Miami, they won 39-17. In the game of the year thus far, the Vikings, they beat the Bills in overtime 33-30. And also shout out to myself there. I mean, that hot take, Justin Jefferson, that went pretty well. Then Aaron Rodgers, the Packers, they got back on track with an overtime win of their own over the Dallas Cowboys. And finally, on Monday Night Football, the Eagles, they lost for the first time this entire season as Taylor Heineke and company, they showed that dog in them, Donnie.
Oh yeah, Taylor Heineke, he's someone you just have to root for. As a big St. Louis Battlehawks fan, seeing the backup going into the NFL, having the success he's had so far, it's magical. He's a guy, may not be the most talented, but he just inspires his team around him. A big upset, you can never rule out Heineke.
Certainly. I mean, how about that? We have an XFL fan here, the St. Louis Battlehawks. But really, I think I like what you said there about Taylor Heineke. Maybe not playing the highest level of football, but you could tell when he goes out there, he's the kind of guy the team really does rally around him.
Yeah, and, the Commanders aren't like the best all-around team. They're always going to stay in a game. They're never going to go down easily. Always a tough matchup no matter how good your team is. Heineke, gotta love the guy.
Certainly. I don't know how you can't love him. And someone also loves something else. We're going to go to the next segment, teams moving up in the biggest movers. And those teams that are moving up, Donnie, how can you not talk about the Vikings? They knock off the Bills, only one loss on the season. All of a sudden, they're shooting up power rankings.
Yeah, the Vikings, 7 straight games they've won by 1 score. Kirk Cousins and all the talent around him. I mean, Captain Kirk has the Vikings in uncharted territory at this 8-1 record. He's the modern-day Leif Erikson. You got to root for these guys.
I mean, certainly, I don't know how you don't root for the Vikings, especially in an NFC right now, kind of treading water. You don't see many of those teams at the top. I mean, the Eagles, they picked up their first loss. All of a sudden, the Vikings, they're in a real conversation to win the NFC.
Yeah, there's a lot of teams in the NFC right now that are maybe not expected to be as good as they are, but they're at that point, the Vikings and the Eagles, and there's some teams lying around with a lot of talent like the 49ers, but you got to like the way the Vikings are playing. Kirk Cousins, arguably an MVP finalist this season. Justin Jefferson, a top 2 receiver in the league, and then Dalvin Cook in the backfield. The defense been playing better. This is a team that you got to watch.
Right. I mean, you mentioned those offensive weapons. The Vikings, that offense is scary for any defense. If the Bills can't lock you down, I mean, particularly they give up 33 points. Just about nobody can. That Bills defense, they've been playing at the top 5 level, albeit they were a little beat up. But really, I mean, that Vikings offense, Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook, you mentioned it. I mean, they even brought in TJ Hawkinson. This offense, it's definitely something special.
Yeah, TJ Hawkinson, a really underrated tight end. Sort of flew under the radar there in Detroit with the Lions' overall team success, but Hawkinson, always someone you got to watch. Top 5 to 10 tight end in the league for sure.
Certainly. I mean, the rare in-division trade, definitely something a little strange. We're going to talk about a team that's in the same division as the Bills now, AFC East, the Dolphins. I mean, they absolutely blew out the Browns, 39-17. Why are they moving up the rankings, Donnie?
Because this is a team that's really silenced the critics as this year has gone on. Tyreek Hill was a great addition in the offseason. He would be my pick as the best receiver in the league. I don't think anyone else elevates their team at a skill position level, at a skill position like Tyreek Hill. And I have someone like Tua who's been battered, beaten around this year, but he's a gritty player. He's always going to go out there and play with a ton of heart. This is a Dolphins team. The defense might not be there, but the offense is clicking on all cylinders.
Certainly. I mean, this offense, it's staying in there with the best of them. Tyreek Hill currently on track to beat Calvin Johnson's record for most receiving yards in a season. Wide receiver 2, Jalen Waddle, I mean, he would be the wide receiver 1 on 90% of teams in the NFL. You mentioned it. Tua's been playing better with those weapons. The defense is starting to click, and all of a sudden, this AFC East race, it seemed like the Bills division. The Dolphins, they're in first right now at 7-3.
The NFC East is an absolutely loaded division. The Bills have been the favorite, I would say, for most of the year, but the Dolphins working their way up in the standings, currently in first. And you got a Jets team that's ahead of schedule right behind them, and a Patriots team that's really flown under the radar as well.
Certainly both East divisions looking really good. The AFC East, I mean, they have been phenomenal. You mentioned it, the New York Jets, they play the Patriots this week. If they win that game, I know we'll get to that one in a moment, they'll actually be in first place in the division themselves. So definitely a lot going on in the AFC East. And the NFC East, I mean, it looks like it's the Eagles' division to lose, but still the Eagles, the Cowboys, the Commanders, and of course the Giants. I mean, that's a division that will likely be generating at least 3 playoff teams. So interesting that both East divisions are playing so well. But Donnie, of course, there's 2 sides to every story. We talked about the teams moving up, a team moving down, the team that lost to the Vikings, the AFC East's Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, the Bills early in the season, they looked like they would run away. I predicted some friends early in there. The Bills would actually go undefeated, and they haven't shown that. They've shown some inconsistencies. I still think this is a team that has all the potential there to win the Super Bowl, but you have to be a bit concerned with some of the close losses lately.
Certainly. I mean, they're one of those teams, they've got all the talent. Josh Allen, undeniably a top 3 quarterback in the league. They've got Stephon Diggs. That defense, when healthy, one of the top units in the league. But I think teams are starting to realize this Bills team, their weakness, they play a little bit too much through Josh Allen. They have a lot of faith in the guy, and that's good. You want to go out there with faith in your QB1, but I think teams are starting to target that, make Josh Allen do a little bit less, and all of a sudden they've lost 2 in a row.
Yeah, the Bills early in the year, some weaknesses definitely showing that weren't there early in the year, and they look dominant, but now I don't think teams are scared to play them.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Another team that, quite frankly, coming into the year, they seem scary. They seem to be on this side of the segment now every week. The Rams, they lose 27-17 to the Cardinals. What's going on in LA?
Well, what's going on is they lost 2 of their best players in the offseason. Odell Beckham really elevated that offense, I think, an underrated amount. Really 3 of their best players, Andrew Whitworth, the offensive tackle, retiring, Odell Beckham, the injury, and then you lost Von Miller off the edge, which was a big loss for a defense that's still really talented, Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey. But the Rams, the offense isn't clicking. The offensive line is terrible. Every time I watch them, Stafford's getting sacked every other play, it feels like. And now you have Cooper Kupp going down with an injury. This is a Rams team without many weapons. The run game isn't anything special. They don't have depth at the receiver position either.
Well, Donnie, I'm really glad you mentioned Andrew Whitworth because he's kind of that missing piece of the puzzle. He flies under the radar a little bit, but you mentioned it. This Rams O-line, they have not looked the part. Matthew Stafford already been stacked 2 more times through this season than he was the entirety of last. The best unit in the league, all of a sudden one of the worst. And Andrew Whitworth, he really was the glue there at left tackle. And you mentioned it, Odell Beckham Jr. being gone. And now, of course, they're moving down Cooper Kupp. I mean, they're praying it is a high ankle sprain. At the time of the recording, we're not sure what that injury is. But Donnie, what does this offense look like without Cooper Kupp?
Well, it doesn't look really good. That's for sure. Stafford is still an elite quarterback, a future Hall of Famer in my book. I think he's great, but if he doesn't have the pieces there, he's not someone who can necessarily carry a team. The running game with Akers and Henderson, they're both solid backs, but it's nothing that's going to win you any games. And you look at the receiving staff now, Higbee, a solid tight end. Allen Robinson will likely get more usage, and you're going to see Ben Skronik step into a role as well. But who else? They need someone who's going to be an unsung hero, someone to step up, and I'm not sure they have that guy quite yet that can really elevate them to a winning football. I wouldn't count on them making the playoffs.
Well, certainly you mentioned Odell Beckham Jr. It feels like if this Rams team wants a chance, they're going to have to bring him in sooner than later. Cooper Kupp, regardless when he's back, he has been the offense this season. You mentioned the running game. You mentioned the targets. Those are all solid guys, but none of them, as you mentioned, really elevate that roster. It feels like something's been missing from the Sean McVay offense all season long with Cooper Kupp. So now they lose Cooper Kupp. Of course, they're moving down in power rankings. The Rams, they're missing their top offensive weapon. They're below 500. The defending Super Bowl champs, they're just not looking themselves.
Yeah, things are just not looking good in Los Angeles right now. The Rams, things are starting to fall apart. They'll have to regroup after this year, but I don't think this year they can really get right back on track. They're one of the bottom teams in the league right now.
Yeah, Donnie, I'd have to agree with you. And we're going to move to our next segment, 4 picks, 4 key games. And we'll start off. The New York Jets, they're heading to New England. They played just 2 games ago. They'll take on the Patriots.
Yeah, these are 2 teams that when they played, it was really close the last time. New England winning 22-17. This is a Jets team without Breece Hall now. They're going to have to rely on Zach Wilson a lot. The big question is whether or not he can do enough to get the job done. The Patriots, on the other hand, in a loaded division, they're flying under the radar at 5-4 right now. But Belichick has his guys playing right. I think it's going to be another really close game on the road in New England for the Jets. I think they fall in a close one right here. The Jets, a team that I think is 1 year ahead of schedule, but next year are going to be really tough.
Well, you want to talk about a team flying under the radar? Give me the Jets in this one. They're the far better team on paper. This defense is playing at a top 3 level, and you mentioned it. They're going to have to rely a lot more on Zach Wilson in this game, and that feels scary. Just those 2 games ago, they played the Patriots, and it did not look pretty. Zach Wilson has not played well against the Patriots, to say the least, in his career. I mean, Bill Belichick has had his number, but I feel like they're going to be playing mad after that last loss to New England. I mentioned that I feel like they're more talented, and you talked about being under the radar. I mean, this Jets team, they're being overlooked by the other coaching staff. Let's give this clip of Bill Belichick a listen.
Again, the Jets are the Jets. They have their way of doing things, and there's a foundation from another system or another time or another team. But you're going back a couple teams now: San Francisco to Seattle. Right now, the Jets are the Jets.
And Donnie, I mean, I think that's just about as clear as day. I mean, when an opposing coach is overlooking an opponent, I mean, that can't be understated. This New York Jets team being disrespected by New England, that entire media. Give me the Jets, and I don't think it's going to be relatively close.
I respectfully disagree with you there, AJ. I think whether this is a toss-up, I think the Jets could win. I'm picking the Patriots, but I think this one is going to be a close game regardless.
Certainly, I mean, divisional game in New England. I can understand that the Patriots currently 3.5-point favorites, but the Jets, again, I mean, it feels like after this win, they'd move to 7-3. It gets to the point where the national media, they've got to start putting respect on this team. This could be Zach Wilson's coming out party. First time the Jets have beat the Patriots in Foxborough, get this, since 2010 with the Sanchez in the playoffs.
Very underrated quarterback. Love Mark Sanchez, led them to 2 conference championships. He needs more respect. The butt fumble ruined his legacy, and I'm here to help build it back up.
Yeah, there you have it. Mark Sanchez, Donnie Harmon is here for you. Moving to the next game, Donnie, who do you like? Los Angeles Rams, they're heading to New Orleans. They'll take on the Saints.
Well, I like neither of these teams, actually. Rams without Cooper Kupp. The question now moves, can they win this game with their defense against a really bad Saints team this year? The answer is no, but it's also not no. It's not yes either. This is going to be a tie.
Donnie.
Neither team is winning this one.
Both
teams lose.
That's ridiculous. I don't think it ends in a tie. I'm going to tell you, I think the New Orleans Saints are going to win this game. And I like what you said. Both these teams certainly heading in the wrong directions. Cooper Kupp, we just mentioned his impact on the Rams. And as for the Saints, a team that invested so heavily around Jameis Winston, it felt like this had to be their year. They traded up in last year's draft. All of a sudden, the Eagles, it looks like they're surely going to have a top 5 pick in this draft because they hold New Orleans selection. I mean, this game is one that I don't like either team too much either, but I feel like this Saints team, at the end of the day, they're just going to outscore the Rams without Cooper Kupp. I mean, the Rams, they've had the 2nd worst offense in terms of yards per game. The Saints, they're doing slightly better. Chris Olave is stepping up into that role of wide receiver 1. Alvin Kamara, he's come back. He's starting to look like vintage AK, if you will. Really like what I've seen from him. Not that I love the Saints, but in an NFC game where it feels like the loser of this could very well be eliminated from the postseason conversation, give me the Saints. I like what they've got going on there.
I understand giving the Saints the edge. I think they'll outplay the Rams on this one. I think they'll have a lead late, but try and get cute with a play to Taysom Hill. It's going to be a costly fumble deep in their territory that allow the Rams to force overtime, in which it's going to be a stalemate.
I'll tell you what, this kid sounds like a psychic. If this happens, I mean,
it will happen.
That would surely be unbelievable. He's very confident. Taysom Hill, you say it again, what's going to happen?
It's going to be deep in their territory. They're going to try and get cute with a play to Taysom Hill. He's going to fumble, and it's going to cost them the win. It won't give them the loss, but it will cost the Saints a chance to win the game.
Hey, I'll tell you what. If it ends in that fashion, I think that you'll have to buy a lottery ticket. But we'll move to the next game, Donnie. The Dallas Cowboys, they're going to head up to Minnesota. They'll play the Vikings. Who are you liking in this one? Not a tie, right?
It's not going to be a tie, but it is going to be really close. This is a Vikings team that wins a lot of close games. It feels like they're going to slip up pretty soon, but this is a Cowboys team. They're having a really good year, 6-3, but coming off that blown lead against the Packers, it feels like there's a lot of bad mojo down in Dallas. And I like the Vikings to win a close one. I like it to be a shootout.
There we go, Donnie. We're finally going to agree. This is going to be a close matchup, and the Vikings are going to win it. I mean, I have no reason to pick against the Vikings right now. They just beat most people's number 1 team in the NFL. I mean, Justin Jefferson, he's been unstoppable, even for a guy like Trevon Diggs. And Kirk Cousins, he's just statistically been a better quarterback when playing at home. I know you're a Michigan State fan, big Kirk Cousins guy, but regardless, I like what I've seen from the Vikings more than what I like what I've seen from the Cowboys. You mentioned it, coming off of a loss. I mean, it depends on how you look at that team, led by Jerry Jones, led by Mike McCarthy. But for me, that loss to the Packers at this point is a bad loss. The Packers, they lost on Thursday night. They moved to 4-7 now on the season, likely missing the postseason. This Cowboys team that a lot of people were putting a lot of respect on, all of a sudden for me, moving to the back burners just a little bit. I do like it to be close, but I agree. Give me Minnesota.
Yeah, definitely. The big question, of course, this game, I believe the 4:30 slot is going to be how the new nightmare Kirk Cousins performs in a later slot, but I think he's got that mojo from playing those early games and is going to help the Vikings in this one big.
Donnie will stick to one more NFC matchup for this one, 3 in a row. This time, the 49ers, they're going to go to Arizona. They'll play the Cardinals. Who are you picking?
And this feels like a game that the 49ers should win in Mexico, but there's something about this team. They have all the pieces, but people are overlooking just how mediocre they've been this season. One game over 500. And I still see people putting them in their power rank, or the top 10 of their power rankings, putting them even top 5 sometimes. But this 49ers team, they haven't pieced it together. Jimmy G's a decent quarterback, but when you're looking to win with an explosive offense with all these weapons, I don't think he's the guy you really need to utilize that. The 49ers haven't impressed me. The Cardinals, another team that's sort of been slumping this year, but the talent is there. Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins. I think the key in this one for the Cardinals is going to be James Conner. He's dealt with some injuries this year, but he's very productive when he's healthy. I think a healthy dose of James Conner is going to be the key for a Cardinals narrow victory.
Well, for me, Donnie, I look at both these teams. You stack them up on paper, and really, it's a 50-50 shootout. I like what I've seen from both sides. You mentioned it, Jimmy Garoppolo. He's a respectable NFL quarterback. Christian McCaffrey brought in. Of course, he's great. James Conner coming back. The wide receivers, Deebo Samuel, DeAndre Hopkins. And then defensively, both teams looking sharp as well. I think I'm going to have to go with the 49ers simply because of coaching. I don't believe in Cliff Kingsbury.
Oh, no.
I don't think he'll be in Arizona after this year. Kyle Shanahan, one of the better offensive minds in the NFL. That system, it just works so well, and it's worked well against Cliff Kingsbury in his young career. Give me Jimmy Garoppolo. Give me Kyle Shanahan. I'm going to roll with San Francisco.
And you mentioned Shanahan, and that's the thing that's really sort of baffling with the 49ers situation. They have all these weapons. They have a really good coach and a great offensive mind, but for some reason they haven't really put it together on the field so far this year. And I'm with you. I don't trust Cliff Kingsbury. I think it's one of the biggest examples of failing upward. Got fired from Texas Tech and somehow got the job with the Cardinals to be some sort of Sean McVay clone, I feel like. But, you know, for some reason, I just think the Cardinals are able to pull this one out. They have some talent, and the Niners, it's going to be a wake-up call.
Yeah, I mean, it'll certainly be interesting. It feels like a lot of the games this week, maybe teams that are just right around that 500 mark that will, I mean, it should produce some really good football. So I'm excited to watch it. That one, of course, going to be on Monday night. But, Donnie, we'll move to the next segment of the show. We're going to go to Hot Takes. And, Donnie, what's the take that you are just scorching hot on? I know you're excited to talk about this one.
I have 2 hot takes. My first hot take, I've said Kirk Cousins, I've been hyping him up. He's having a monster game against the Cowboys. Mark it down, 444 yards for Kirk Cousins on the dot. He's going to lead them to a victory.
So not over 444 yards. You're saying Kirk Cousins will have exactly 444 yards?
Exactly 444 yards.
Do you have a rationale? Where did that number come from?
It just feels right, AJ. It was revealed to me in a dream.
All right, well, Donnie had a dream about it, and now all of a sudden we've got 2 crazy Donnie Harmon picks. A tie in that NFC matchup. Now we've got Kirk Cousins for exactly 444 yards. I've got to say, I don't see it happening, but my hot take, maybe not as hot as that one. You know, Kenny Pickett, he's got 2 touchdowns total on the season. I expect him to go above that simply on Sunday against the Bengals. Give me Kenny Pickett to throw for 3 passing touchdowns over the Bengals.
Yeah, Kenny Pickett's someone who has been a bit disappointing, I would say, this year, but I think the talent's still there for him to take a step forward. Bengals defense isn't anything special. I think it's a good chance for Pickett to have a coming-out party.
Certainly, I mean, just interesting because he was supposed to be this NFL-ready guy. He's come in. He certainly hasn't looked the part. Only 2 touchdowns, as I mentioned, all season. But why do I like him against Cincinnati? You mentioned it. That Bengals defense, to me, just is nothing to write home about. Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, they're going to have a field day with that defensive secondary led by Eli Apple. Give me this Kenny Pickett-led offense to be successful. The Steelers will be in this game late. I'm not going to say they're going to win, but I am going to tell you Kenny Pickett, he's going to have a game.
And I can see that happening. Pickett, he's due for a big one.
Certainly. Donnie, one more hot take each. I'll let you go first. What's that second hot take?
Well, we were talking earlier about the East divisions, how strong they are, and I'm not going to deny the NFC East is a really strong division, but I think they go 0 for 4 this week. Obviously, I have the Vikings knocking off the Cowboys, and then you look around the league, the Giants at home against the Lions team, you think they'd win that one. The Giants, I think, are overperforming so far. I think they've played great coaching. They've executed, but the talent level is more middle of the pack. That this is a Lions team that's lost a lot of close games. I think the offense has a big one. I think the Lions upset New York on the road. Then the Commanders going on the road against the Texans. They're bad, but they're not that bad. The Commanders are decent, but not that decent. I like the Texans in a close one as well right there. And then the Eagles coming off their first loss of the season. I think they right the ship, but I don't think it's this week. This is a really weird Colts team that just looks terrible against bad teams or mediocre teams, and they'll look good against a team like the Chiefs and knock them off. Week 2 under Jeff Saturday, there's something magical in Indy, and you can't explain it. Everything is horrible on paper, but I think they find a way to get the win against the Eagles.
And you're making our audio guy, Sam Neiger, back there super happy to hear that Jeff Saturday will get his win. That was his hot take. Last week it came true. You know, you need a couple upsets in there for that to happen, but I'll tell you what, Donnie, you've made it clear. You're pretty much a psychic, so
I am.
We'll see if it comes together. I'm going to talk about my last one, and you know, it's my show. I've got to find a way to talk about the New York Jets. We talked about them beating the Patriots. I'm going to get into the specifics. This Jets team, this offense led by Zach Wilson, give me 4 different guys, count it, to score a touchdown for the New York Jets this week. Elijah Moore, he's moving to the slot for the first time. Garrett Wilson against the Patriots last time, it was his coming out party. He played absolutely phenomenal. This Jets team filled with weapons. Denzel Mims is going to be out there with Corey Davis out. That duo of tight ends, Tyler Conklin, CJ Uzomah. I'll tell you what, Sauce Gardner, that defense, they might even come up with a touchdown. 4 different players, 4 different touchdowns. New York Jets, they beat the Patriots. Mark it down.
It's a fair pick.
All right, well, Donnie, we're going to go to the last segment of the show. We'll go to fantasy football starts and sits.
Yeah, my start for the week, looking at the Los Angeles Rams, we talked about how bad that offense is, and now with Cooper Kupp out, that's going to mean a healthy dose of Ben Skronik. He's a good route runner, good possession receiver. I think Stafford's going to target him, and he'll catch you off guard with his athleticism at times. I expect a big week for the Fort Wayne, Indiana native.
That's what I was just going to say, Donnie. That's the exciting thing about Benny Boy. He went to the same high school as you, correct?
He did, Homestead High School.
Exciting. I mean, definitely a expected bigger role for the wide receiver there for the Rams. I like the pick. I was actually considering it myself. As you mentioned, someone is going to have to step up in this offense, and why not him?
Yeah, and if you're looking for someone in that flex spot, someone, you know, maybe your third receiver out there, I think Ben Skronik is a great pick this week. He's already someone I think should be on a lot of rosters as a backup if you need him. And I think this is the week you got to put him in that starting lineup.
Certainly. And Donnie, you talked about the flex spot, and that feels like it's always been ran by the wide receiver position this year specifically, and that's really because the running back position, it just hasn't showed up. You've been looking for any production you could get, and this week you're going to find that production in Brian Robinson. I want you to start Brian Robinson, and here's why. This Texans D-line, they've ranked dead last in the league so far against the run. They've allowed an 100-yard rusher in 8 of their 9 games this season, and Brian Robinson, he seems to be back to his vintage form, if you will. Before that, of course, tragic shooting in the offseason, but luckily for him, he was able to make a speedy recovery. He's back. Ron Rivera and company, they're buying into him. Give me Brian Robinson to run all over this Texans front 7.
Yeah, Brian Robinson, easy guy to root for. Him and Heineke in the backfield is magic. I obviously think the Texans get the win this week, but the Commanders are someone you can pull for with those 2 guys back there.
Certainly. And Donnie, we talked about it earlier. 2 sides to every story. We talked about the starts. Who's the player you're looking to sit this week?
Well, with the movement of the Bills game to Detroit inside now, it was going to be Josh Allen, but a different quarterback. Derek Carr, he's been a fringe starter this year. I believe on Sleeper, he's the number 18 quarterback overall. And I think Derek Carr is an excellent quarterback. I think he's one of the more underrated players in the NFL, but this is just not the year for the Raiders. It isn't his year. Going against a Broncos team that's really disappointed this year, but have the number 1 passing defense as far as total yardage is concerned, I think it's going to be a rough go for Derek Carr and a sliding Raiders team.
I certainly would agree with you, Donnie. You mentioned it, that Broncos team, yeah, they've been a disappointment, but it's been the offense. I mean, if they had, I would argue, if they even had a league average 16th best offense, this would be a completely different story. This Broncos team, they'd probably have a winning record right now, and Derek Carr in a 1 quarterback format, probably not a guy you're looking to start, especially against the Broncos, but I'd even argue in a super flex, if you have another option, put him in there. I agree. Derek Carr, stay away from him this week.
Yeah, Derek Carr, nothing against him. And just as far as fantasy is concerned, this is not the week for him. Great quarterback, in my opinion, close to top 10, maybe a top 10 quarterback in the league, but things are sliding for the Raiders. You'll have to regroup after this season, and now is not the time.
Certainly. And Donnie, I'm going to go to a guy that I already talked about last week, and I still don't understand why he's in starting lineups. Currently being started in about 60% of ESPN leagues, and I just can't explain it. Get DeAndre Swift on your bench. He has had one game this season with over 7 carries, and it was week 1. The Lions clearly have no faith in his ability to stay healthy, and there should be no reason you have faith in him in your fantasy starting lineup. I know it hurts benching a guy who is probably maybe your end of the first round, start of the second round pick, but that's just the way this season has gone. Jamal Williams is the lead rusher there in Detroit, and DeAndre Swift, you need to pivot off of him. Get him out of the lineup.
Yeah, DeAndre Swift was someone last year under the radar I was able to pick up in a mid-round, and he was a great addition to my lineup. He had a really good fantasy season a year ago, and I think he's still a really talented running back, but he doesn't stay healthy. He's dealt with injuries, and it's a Detroit offense that really likes to throw the ball. Not a great player to have in your lineup. DeAndre Swift riding off of the past reputation. People still expecting a big week from him, and it could happen at some point. Maybe later in the year as he gets in a rhythm and gets healthier, but right now is not the time.
Certainly, and it's not a shot at DeAndre the person or DeAndre the player, more so just that Lions coaching staff making it abundantly clear that that is not the direction they're going to go in the backfield, and until they say otherwise, I can't warrant putting DeAndre Swift in that starting lineup.
Yeah, sometimes you need some evidence before you put someone in your lineup.
Certainly, and I think that's where we're going to leave it off. This was the HB Toss, brought to you by the creative storytellers of Ball State Sports Link. I'm AJ Swiatek for the psychic Donnie Harmon. We're signing off.